Lifers Podcast. Get with it or get forgotten.
Oh, nice. And so, I mentioned a little bit earlier, the topic of, one of the big things for this podcast is to really get an idea of what to expect and how to prepare for our clinical outpatient rotations. My cohort, and those are in my same year. We start this September, hopefully, knock on wood, everything is fine. We start this September on our rotations. So I surveyed my class. I asked them, what are things that they want to know, questions that they would love to get answered, in regards to an outpatient clinic rotation. And if you're okay with it, I would love to be able to ask you some questions that they came up with.
Yeah, let's see what some of those thoughts are.
All right. So the first one is, and I have a feeling I know why they asked this, but what is the best way to approach outcome measures?
So outcome measures, when we talk about outcome measures, are we referring to the subjective or also just like the physical performance outcome measures, or both of them?
It could be both, but I think this question is more so the physical performance ones and the quality of life, measures and those kind of things.
Right.
Because we're taught them to be so, like, essentially they're so heavily taught in the physical therapy curriculum, and
right.
And so it almost feels like you have to do 5 of them in an eval just to make it just objectively have reasons for people to even do physical therapy. So I guess what's the best way to approach it?
Yeah, and I don't know if I could say a best way. I know in that I was in my education, they had pointed out just to go to the APTA site, because that would then give you sort of what's that expectation or standard for someone who is as a student, and what physical performance measures would we anticipate or like to have some knowledge, or even potentially what you'd be tested from an MPTE standpoint. But even with the way that the question's asked, I can see it's like you get into you step into a bedroom and it's dirty, and it's like, oh, where am I going to start with this? Yeah. And I think if we're that you can take that sort of lump dump, oh my gosh, where do I go, and start to have maybe a few different organized manners. If what we're talking about, I know one thing that you're strong within there, Kevin, or of interest, is like your return to sports, and what are those tests that we're going to use. And I think if you have a better understanding of what is it that it's supposed to show, or how can I create more power of assumption by accumulating more of those tests, right?
Is it something that students struggle with? Do you think when some of the students you've had, they come in and they don't know which outcome measures to do with patients, or has it kind of been not really too much struggle?
Right. I think it's more of where you'll remember the MDIC, or the meaningful difference and change. I think those things are not as, I'm not as concerned with the students knowing what those are. I know they can look them up. And after you do 10, 15 and you're in the clinic, you'll most likely remember them, just not at the stage of where you would be. So to me, I think that's not the bigger part of what you want to miss. I think it's more about the consideration of, what are we using this outcome form for, or this physical performance? A lot of times it's a prognosis. What's going to be the statistical likelihood of them getting back to their sport? I think that is just taking, well, what is their sport? What is this activity? What was the injury or the deficit we need to address? Mm-hmm. Does this outcome form best fit that? And there isn't like generally where you're going to have 6 or 7 choices to where, well, I'm really stuck in between. It doesn't typically equate to that. You'll find that after you look through research, there will be a very similar, I would say, look and assess and objectively, what are these norms and what are the tests that's going to show me the best of what I need. I can make it a little trickier for you. And I think the only thing that I would, that I learned early in my career is, let's talk about Medicare. Okay. Medicare patients, typically, if where that y'all have learned, it's probably like in your second year about, on the 10th visit, hey, we have to do a progress note. Mm-hmm. When you have that progress note, what are some of the outcomes that you think, Kevin, for someone, if I said, hey, this lady, Fran, has a lot of falls, what would first trigger your mind to what you might want to look? Yeah.
I would want to look at
Right.
balance. So I know just some things that, whether we're looking at, static balance, dynamic balance, reaching balance, if is it just because, is it, maybe mini best, or, we're trying to just do things to show that she needs continued therapy. So, but I know Medicare likes to see the results of Berg, and the
Yeah.
DGI or tug,
Right.
things of that nature.
Yeah, and I think in some parts knowing and where it comes with experience after you've seen several of that demographic population, then you can have a better representation of where would you see them in 4 or 6 weeks. Do you feel that that outcome most likely or potentially will show the improvement, right? I don't think I need to remember what are the ceiling and floor effects,
Yeah.
but if I think that you've got some appreciation to know what the demand of saying, ooh, this DGI or dynamic gait index is probably going to be a little more tricky than for someone who is not or as capable. And then it's your question is, okay, well, do I need to show that there's going to be some potential for them? Or am I going to set them up for failure and make these things too hard for them to ever accomplish? So I think like with where your question, those are the parts that I could appreciate and understand. Where do I go and what do I choose? It's more about your distinguishing and how does this relate to the patient? How am I going to get them more visits? If that's what they medically need or it's reasonable.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate that. We're going to go on to the next question. It says, what is the best way for a student to take notes? Is it, while watching? Is it afterwards? Is it just not at all and just try not to make it obvious that you're a student? Like what's the best way to approach that?
So you're saying like taking notes, like when you're at the clinic and doing your internship?
Yes. Like we're in there and our, the CI is trying to, teach us something and, how do we go about that?
Yeah, I mean, it really goes back to just like know your learning style. And I think that's the first thing that I cover base with the intern is just what are your learning styles? What do you prefer? Feedback, which type? And it's funny you asked that question because I myself, I didn't use notes. I just went in. I was more like throw me to the wolves, let's invest, and I'll get what I need to.
Yeah.
My current intern, where I note and looked on her folder and said good things, and then also things that need more work. And so I sat with her. It's like, so what have you been putting on this notebook? I'd be very curious if you're willing to share. And she's like, I'm just trying to list some of the things of what you've discussed, some of the positives of what you've commended me on, and those areas of where I need to be able to better improve. So, and that's probably out of the last of my 4 or 5 I would almost likely say that all but maybe one that hasn't used notes or has written anything down. And a lot of it, I think, is just, especially those first 2 weeks, many will get very just overwhelmed. It's normal, expect it, it's okay. But I think as dust settles, then that writing on the notebook could sometimes become a little less apparent because you get more familiar with what you know. I think we're just even like for all of you going into your first internship, I think that was the thing that was more critical was that many would go and did not have their own level of self-confidence. And you're like, man, I don't want to screw this up. And sure enough, of course, just like y'all will probably have where we have our weekly comments or reflection that we serve as a class. Yes. And that first week or second week, many of the students got there and just like, wow, I'm really actually surprised on how much I know, because you know it from a test, but you don't know it's like, hey, real world, go. Now you're like on stage and I need to perform. So many, I think, come back more surprised at themselves and realizing they actually know more than what they think. So I would just put that out for all of you. You're going to find good to have some of that thought, but you'll learn that you knew and you've applied a lot with these last 4 years. That will, I think, it'll be a good surprise. Always is.
And that's good to hear because I think a lot of us, physical therapy students, it's fair to say that we really do feel like we have imposter syndrome sometimes, you know, like when we go through 4 years of grad school and we forget that we know, we've learned a lot. And it's because we're still learning stuff new. So we don't know the stuff that we're learning new yet that well. So we kind of have this weird, like, you know, constant feeling of like, what do we even know? So it's great to hear that, you know, that we're, you know, school is actually paying off.